So this is the sad story of a man who gambled away almost £250,000 in his pension. Don't worry, it's not me, even though the name of the channel suggests it might be. The reason this is so sad is because this is, by his own admission, left him really struggling, and it has some really important things that I think should be discussed, because I don't think there's much discussion going on around pension drawdowns and how you actually extract money from your pension when you need it. So hello, my name is Chaz, and I go by the name of the Risk on Investor here on YouTube. This channel is documenting my journey to building a £1 million investment portfolio, some of which is in my pension. And as I'm documenting this journey, I'll be documenting some of my investments, I'll be documenting things I'm trying to make a little bit of extra money on the side. And if all of that sounds interesting to you, it'd be really great if you hit the subscribe button, then you'll be notified of future video releases, and hopefully you'll enjoy the content. So I told the longer version of this story in my newsletter last week, and if you want to read that, I'll put the link down in the description below. You don't need to be subscribed to read it, but if you are subscribed, then you get my thoughts once a week dropped into your inbox. And it's where I'm hoping to build a lot of the Risk on Investor community. So for this video, I'm just going to concentrate on one part of the story, and that's the part of the story where unfortunately this person lost the majority of their money in their pension. Now, most of the data for this video comes from two sources. One is from the FT Advisor, which has 2 articles that I could find on this chap, and the other comes from a decision notice by the Financial Ombudsman Service, or FOS. I'm going to probably say FOS because I find Ombudsman quite difficult to say. And now, while there are some timelines in the decision notice by the FOS, some of it I've had to extrapolate some dates, and so I'm going to give a rough timeline, but the dates may not be exact, because I'm just using people's ages and claimed events that happened. So I want to start by taking you back to 2017. In 2017, a chap by the name of Fintan Moran has just turned 55 years old, and he's amassed a private pension in a SIPP worth £220,000. Now, just to put that into context, that's about twice the median pension for someone of that age, according to the ONS. And Mr. Moran claims that 3 years after this, so by the time he was 58 in 2020, that pension had lost almost all of its value. And now, at the age of 62, Mr. Moran only has £3,000 left in his pension. That's a decline of almost 99% across the last 7 years, with Mr. Moran claiming the majority of that happened within the first 3 years. And so the reason this story made it to the FOS is that Mr. Moran complained to the Ombudsman that Hargreaves Lansdown, which is the SIPP platform of his choice, didn't provide the necessary protections for him, as he was diagnosed with a gambling addiction. Now, as far as I can make out, the gambling addiction wasn't disclosed to Hargreaves Lansdown until 2021, and it's unclear to me whether he already knew about this addiction beforehand or had been diagnosed beforehand, or was only just diagnosed in 2021. But the likelihood is that this diagnosis, or when it was suddenly disclosed to Hargreaves Lansdown, was after the initial 3 years where Mr. Moran claims to have lost the majority of his investment. So based on that brief summary, you can see why the FOS rejected his claim against Hargreaves Lansdown and said that Hargreaves Lansdown acted as it should have done, although they did get a slap on the wrist for a few late replies to some emails. Now also, as far as I can tell, Hargreaves Lansdown offered no investment advice to Mr. Moran. After all, this was a SIPP service, and Hargreaves Lansdown is just providing the platform. This isn't a managed personal pension service. Hargreaves Lansdown also appears to have done all the required aptitude and appropriateness tests as required by the FCA. Now, unfortunately, these kind of tests are obviously reliant on the responses of the person carrying out the test, which may be a potential flaw in them. But it does raise some questions about pension freedoms in general, and whether we as individuals can actually be trusted to manage our own money. And that's what I want to dig into here in today's video. So as a young investor, I find it quite interesting to dig into some of the changes that we've seen in the pension laws and how they're enacted. And I didn't really realise that the inception of pensions really started in 1989. Now, it seems that the pension service from 1989 is very different to the one we would recognise today, and it didn't really take off with the general public until the early 2000s, as far as I can make out. So in the early 2000s, specifically 2006, a day which was known as A-Day, which really set the scene for today's pension structure, happened, and that introduced a lot of the structures that we know today, such as the lifetime allowance, contribution limits, all those kind of things. From 2006 we can then skip forward another decade to 2015, and that's when the Pension Freedoms Act came in. So the Pension Freedoms Act changed the way that we could access our pensions. So prior to the Freedoms Act, the main way you could really extract money from your pension was through an annuity. So an annuity is just a way to use the money that you've built up in your defined contribution pension to purchase an insurance product which pays you income. Now that product could be inflation linked, it can be uninflation linked, it can be for a fixed period of time, or it could be for the rest of life. But that effectively transfers your defined contribution pension into a defined benefit pension, where your savings now pay you out a fixed rate. But after the Pension Freedoms Act, there was much more flexibility around drawdown, and that's the landscape we generally find ourselves in now. So most of us use quite a simplified version of the SIP wrapper, because there are much more complicated things you can do in a SIP. So you can buy commercial property direct, you can borrow money in your SIP to make investments. There's all kinds of options that are available within a SIP wrapper that most of us just don't use, because we use a platform such as Hargreaves Lansdown or a number of others, which allow us to just use that wrapper to make investments into financial products instead. Now, if I'm honest, I'm actually quite surprised that this is one of the first big stories I've seen about this. Considering we're almost a decade on from pension freedoms, I actually fully expected maybe more people to have gambled away their pension or to have made really reckless decisions with it. I'm sure there are more people who have done this kind of thing, it's just not widely reported. But it really got me thinking about whether pension freedoms are a good idea. Now, I tend to naturally lean on the side of more freedom is generally better for people. After all, you know your situation best, and therefore, theoretically, you're probably in the best position to manage your own money. However, whilst there are pension advice services out there, such as PensionWise, which is a government-backed service, everything I could find about PensionWise suggests that actually not many people are engaging with it, and the people that are engaging with it, not that many of them are taking the advice that's suggested to them. Now, this is either some dangerous cocktail of people being overconfident in their own ability with handling money, or perhaps a lack of education, or a mix of being overconfident with a lack of education. And as your pension is one of the largest financial pots that you're likely to have access to in your lifetime, and you get access to it just overnight like that, I think we're potentially setting ourselves up for a lot more people to find themselves in the position that Mr. Moran found himself in, where they can make either very poor financial decisions, or maybe just bury their head in the sand about their pension and ignore it until it's too late. Now, another part of this story that's quite concerning is the fact that Mr. Moran was able to access a large pot of money even though he had a gambling addiction. Now, I don't know Mr. Moran's background. I don't know whether it maybe should have been obvious that he had a gambling issue earlier in his life and whether that was something he should have recognised, or whether the fact that he just came into a massive pot of money that sort of unlocked that gambling addiction meant that there really wasn't that many warning signs for this. Now, investment platforms such as Hargreaves Lansdown do have a duty of care towards those who use the platform. That duty of care was actually made stricter in 2023, but I can't actually see that many ways that an investment platform can provide really detailed duty of care to the people using the platform. So, for example, beyond the initial aptitude tests or appropriateness tests for investments, a platform, as far as I can see, can really only monitor the activity within an account. And if someone is doing risky investments, it might be too late by the time that pattern is spotted. For example, someone might have a generally quite safe investment strategy and just make the occasional one-off quite risky investment bets. Now, should that be considered too risky for a pension, or should that be allowed? Where does the line get drawn by the investment platforms? Now, these are all things that I just don't have the answer to, and this story's really had me just thinking about it in the back of my mind for quite a little while. And I can't really come up with any good ways forward to stop this happening too much in the future, unless we did go back to a system pre-pension freedoms. Now, I think the system pre-pension freedoms does stop a lot of this worst activity, but it also limits a lot of people. The fact that you can flexibly draw down how you want from your pension means that actually, even if you have a pot of money left over at the end of your life, a pension is not part of your estate, so it can be handed down tax-free to family who may need it later in the future. Whereas most annuities, on your death, there might either be a small payout or that is the end of the product and there's no money left. Now, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. What do you think of the pension freedoms? I know pensions have been chopped and changed with so much over the last decade or so, but would you chop and change with them again to try and stop this kind of situation? If you would, what would you do? How would you try and stop this situation? I think the only real thoughts I have to offer is that maybe there should be an expansion of the government's midlife MOT system. So this is an advice that the government encourages people to take. I don't believe it's mandatory, but maybe it should be made mandatory. So this is a service that's aimed at those between the ages of 45 and 65, and it walks you through a series of questions that prod you in the direction of maybe things that you should look at or things you should be taking account of in your financial journey, and then gives you useful resources. So whilst at the end of the day, it's still in your remit to do your own financial planning, at least there's some structured advice out there. So maybe the midlife MOT could be expanded once maybe early in your career, maybe once you turn 30, and then again once you're in that 45 to 65 bracket, and maybe again maybe 5 years before state retirement age or something like that, as a final point to give people a kick up the backside if they haven't been making any plans for retirement. So that was a bit of a somber story, but I hope it's triggered some thoughts in your head. It certainly triggered some in mine. I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. And if you want more of this content, please hit the subscribe button to be notified of more, and I'll see you in the next video.